The Ghost of Fossil Glen, Chapter 20. On her way to school the next day, Allie was dismayed to see a bulldozer poised at the edge of the meadow. She stopped and stared. It looked like a huge, menacing yellow creature with a wide mouth made to scrape off the skin and dig deep into the guts of the earth, and treads designed to obliterate everything in their path. She shuddered, imagining that thing at work. So she's thinking this thing is probably it's here to destroy the Glen so Mr. Gagney can start building his houses. When she got to school, she groaned as she looked at the blackboard and saw the words pop quiz, math. She was exhausted. How could she possibly concentrate? Allie had hardly slept all night, thinking about Raymond Gagney and how she could stop him from carrying out his plan. She stared wide-eyed into the darkness, hoping that Lucy's ghost would come to her and tell her what to do. She had gotten up 4 times to look in her journal to see if any helpful instructions had appeared. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping to see Lucy's face or hear Lucy's voice. Nothing. It seemed as if Lucy had abandoned her. Every time she began to feel that she might be drifting off to sleep, an image of Raymond Gagney would appear in her mind's eye. She'd never seen the man, but Lucy's vivid descriptions made him real to her. He knew who she was. He knew where she lived. He was right outside her door. No, he had climbed up and was peering in her window. No, he was underneath the bed. Yes, he was waiting for her to sleep so he could put his hands around her, as he had done to Lucy, to silence her forever. Sleep had been impossible, but now that she was in school, she could hardly keep her eyes open. On the day of the math quiz, terrific. So she's being sarcastic. As always, it was difficult to tell who felt worse about the quiz, the kids or Mr. Henry. He passed out the pages apologetically and told them to begin. Read each question carefully and do your best, he said. Allie read the first question. It was about 2 trains leaving a station at different times, traveling at different speeds. Which one would get from point A to point B first? Oh boy. She read the question again, then drew a little picture of 2 trains on her scratch paper. She drew point A and point B. She stared at the little trains, willing them to chug to point B so she could see which one would arrive first. They didn't move. This is ridiculous, she thought. I gotta wake up and think. I've gotta be logical. She turned back to the problem with ferocious concentration. There was a formula for calculating the answer. She simply had to remember it. Slowly she worked her way down the page, carefully filling in answers with her pencil. Soon she came to a question that made her smile. Mr. Henry put one or two gag questions in every test, just for fun. This time the question was, who is buried in Grant's tomb? Allie grinned. Who is buried in Lucy Stiles' grave? The question came to her. Answer. No one. Lucy's body was never found. Allie tried to remember what she read in the newspaper accounts about the search. The police figured that Lucy fell from the cliff. Since her body wasn't at the bottom of the Glen where she fell, they assumed it had been carried downstream. That was logical. Then, since it wasn't anywhere along the creek's banks, they calculated that it had been washed out into the lake by the high waters of the early spring. Again, logical. But, thought Allie excitedly, Lucy didn't fall. She was pushed by Raymond Gagney. And if he tried to strangle her first, the way he had in Allie's dream, maybe he hadn't wanted her body to be found. Maybe he had counted on the police figuring things out exactly the way they did, which meant that he must have done something with Lucy's body. Allie thought about that, gazing fixedly into space, trying to picture the scene. A dark, rainy night, a murderer standing on a cliff staring down at the body of his victim far below in a deep and isolated glen, hoping her body would be swept away, then realizing the risk that the body was ever recovered. What would he do? She felt someone's eyes on her and looked up. Mr. Henry was gazing at her with a worried expression on his face. He pointed to his watch and mouthed the words, "Get to work." Reluctantly, Allie forced her thoughts back to the quiz. When Mr. Henry called for the papers to be handed forward, she had actually answered all the questions. She even thought she got most of them right. Mr. Henry announced that since it was raining with occasional bursts of thunder and lightning, that they would postpone their field trip to Fossil Glen until the following day. Joey Frito raised his hand. "Did you see the sign at the Glen," he asked, "about building houses there?" Mr. Henry looked disturbed. "Yes, I saw that," he said, "and I find it puzzling. My understanding was that the owner, Mrs. Stiles, wanted to leave the Glen as it is for everyone to enjoy. I'm really surprised that she would allow this," he shrugged, "but sometimes people have to do things they'd rather not do." "We could write her a letter," said Dub, "and tell her we've been learning all about the Glen and don't think she should let it be ruined." He looked at Allie, who shrugged and nodded. It couldn't hurt. She hadn't had any luck phoning Lucy's mother, but perhaps Mr. Henry could help them track her down. Allie was willing to bet that Mrs. Stiles, or Mrs. Gagney, or whatever her name was now, didn't know what Gagme was up to. That's a good idea, said Mr. Henry. What do the rest of you think? Yeah, good idea. Let's do it. Okay, said Mr. Henry. Tomorrow during our field trip, we'll make a list of everything we see and all the reasons why we think the Glen should be preserved. Can you bring Hoover tomorrow? Brett asked. Please, begged Julie in a wheedling voice. Please, chorused 23 other voices. Mr. Henry smiled. His dog not only had been to school on many occasions, but also had accompanied the class on several field trips, including one to a local apple farm, where she raced through the orchard and eaten the cores of everyone's apples. Ooh, that's not really good for the tummy. There had been one anxious moment when she had disappeared. When the class found her, she was happily rolling in a large, smelly mound of cow manure behind the barn. Even with all the windows of the bus open, the ride back to school was something nothing of them was likely to forget. Good idea, said Mr. Henry. I'm glad you thought of it. Hoover will be happy too, I'm sure. But if I bring her, you'll all have to help me keep an eye on her. I don't think there's any cow manure in the Glen, but you never know what she'll find to get into. We'll watch her, Julie promised. All right, said Mr. Henry. Miss Hoover will join us. Now, since we won't be going outside, let's go back to the library and continue our research there. I want you to look for field guides that will help us identify the things we see in the Glen tomorrow. Let's go. Allie went straight to Mr. Foster and asked if she could go look again at the newspaper articles about the Glen. Dub joined her as she began to reread each entry carefully. What are you looking for? He asked. I don't know, Allie answered. A clue, maybe? Something I missed the first time? Or any mention of gag me? Yeah, said Dub. If the police were suspicious of him back then, they might believe us if we tell them our theory. Maybe, said Allie doubtfully. If we leave out that we got our information from Lucy's ghost. But they have to pay attention to murder. Murder? Ghost? Said a scornful voice. Allie and Dub looked up to see Karen Laver standing behind them. Don't tell me Allie's sucking you into her ridiculous stories now, Dub. Nobody was talking to you, Karen, said Dub. But I heard you, answered Karen. It says in the newspaper plain as day what happened to that girl, Lucy Stiles. She fell. Somebody falls or gets hurt in the Glen almost every year. But Allie has to turn everything into a big, hairy deal. Why don't you go mind your own business, said Dub. Gladly, said Karen. It's bad enough that Mr. Henry has made Allie his little pet. I'm surprised that you're falling for her stupid stories, too. With a disdainful toss of her braid, she walked away. Allie sat where she was, trying to sort out the confused rush of feelings Karen's remarks had sent flooding through her. What was Karen talking about? She sounded, well, if Allie didn't know better, she'd think Karen was jealous. Once again, Karen had managed to take Allie by surprise, attacking and then retreating before Allie had time to take in what Karen had said, and certainly before Allie had time to think of something to say back. Looking at Dub, she shook her head in consternation. I wish I knew why she hates me so much. Forget it, Al, said Dub. It's a game she plays. She doesn't have anything better to do, but we have, so let's keep looking. They went over every account of the disappearance of Lucy Stiles, but found nothing new and no evidence that Raymond Gagne had been a suspect. What now? Asked Dub. Well, we can hope that your idea about writing to Lucy's mother might at least stop the bulldozers, but that won't help us prove that Lucy was murdered. There had to be a way. Allie thought about what she had read and about all that had happened. She reminded herself that she wasn't even 12 years old, but she was alive, she told herself, and strong, and pretty smart, and for some reason, Lucy had chosen her. She owed it to Lucy to see that Raymond Gagne didn't get away with murder.